Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam Peck. I'm the Executive Director of Family Councils of Ontario, and it is my sincere and extreme pleasure to welcome you to the first session of our June 2022 virtual conference, Regroup, Refocus, Recharge. We have much to celebrate this month. It's Seniors Month, Pride Month, National Indigenous History Month, and Family Council Week. And I am so grateful to be here with all of you to learn about these important celebrations and observances, because you'll see we sprinkle throughout these sessions information about these, and also just to be here with you in this virtual space today. Before we go further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which I'm coming to you from. I'm based in Hamilton, which is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. Some of you may know that FCO was actually founded in Toronto, and that's traditional territory of nations including the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And like the communities, cities, towns across Ontario, they're still home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. As a remote team and working with you all across the province, we encourage all of our team members, service users, and partners to really think about the ongoing legacy of colonialism and engage in reconciliation meaningfully. There's a great website that I encourage you all to check out. It's native-land.ca, I believe, or no, yeah, native-land.ca. And on that, you can type in your city name, and you can actually learn a lot about the territory that your home's situated on. This is important because the work that non-Indigenous organizations and individuals need to do towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is a long-term journey. It'll be specific to each individual, and it's constantly evolving for our organization. So we welcome you to join us on our journey. To mark Seniors Month and Family Council Week, we're holding a series of education and networking sessions throughout the month. June 14th is our signature half-day event where we'll be gathering together for 3 presentations, networking sessions, and generally lots of opportunities to connect with your peers. Next week, we celebrate Pride Month with a session titled Intentionally Inviting and Inclusive Long-Term Care Homes for LGBTQ+ residents and their chosen families. Why are they needed and how can we create them? We invite you to join us for those incredible learning and networking opportunities. But now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Trish Tutton, for her presentation, Enhancing Optimism and Hope. I think we all need a little bit of that right now. I know I do, so I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Trish. We'll explore the brain's negativity bias and how to hardwire optimism without toxic positivity. So it'll be a unique spin on a gratitude practice to help increase its effectivity and an opportunity to really practice. It'll be a guided mindfulness experience that'll actually help our brain create a positivity bias. Now, Trish believes that stress is unavoidable, but doesn't have to dictate our lives. She's a speaker and mindfulness teacher. Through that work has taught the skills to live and work happier to thousands of professionals and has created positive change for her clients to become happier, more productive, effective, and successful without the busy badge of honor. You can find her as a teacher on the #1 free meditation app in the world, Insight Timer, and she's the author of the Mindful Mornings Journal. Trish, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Sam, for that very kind introduction. I want to take a moment as well, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, to acknowledge the land that I'm coming to you from in this virtual space. I am not really very near to many of you, probably. I am coming to you from what's known as Treaty 7 territory. This is the traditional home of the Stoney Nakoda, of the Blackfoot, and of the Tsuut'ina First Nations people. You might know this place a little bit better as beautiful Banff National Park. And as Sam said, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, I really want to acknowledge that I am so grateful to live and to work and to play on this land every single day. I'm thrilled today to spend the next hour with you sharing a bit about how the practices and the teachings of mindfulness can help us to enhance optimism, boost our positivity, and boost our ability to be hopeful even during difficult times. And first, before I dive into all that content and teaching, it's really important that I share with you an experience that I had that it really completely changed the way I looked at life, the way I looked at challenges I would face, and what it really means to be optimistic and hopeful. 9 years ago, and very suddenly, my mom lost what was an incredibly short battle with breast cancer. The hardest thing that I have ever had to navigate in my life, the hardest thing I'd ever had to be optimistic and hopeful about coming out of, was this sudden loss of my mom. Have you ever experienced a moment in your life that made you question everything about life? Because experiencing this sudden loss for me, it made me question a lot of things in my life, especially this belief that we all are guaranteed to get 70 or 80 years to live our lives. In that moment, in that loss, that belief was completely shattered, and it really made me look long and hard at this life that I was creating. I remember in the weeks and the months and even the year after her death, I remember this question echoing in my mind. What are you doing with your one precious life that you've been given? And it really wasn't about what I was doing, in terms of a career. It was more about how I was being. It was more about the quality of my life day to day. And when I really took a hard look at my life, I realized something really interesting, that every single day I seem to have to navigate some sort of stressful situation, right? It could be as simple as, you wake up and you go to make your morning tea or coffee and there's no milk left. Ah, stressful. Or maybe it was a little bit more stressful, maybe traffic, or maybe it was some sort of stress at work. A client was upset, or there was, some big problem that we couldn't anticipate. But every day there was something stressful. But what was more interesting than that fact, that every day included at least one, if not multiple, stressful situations, what was more interesting was the way I was mentally relating to these stressful moments. And it would happen a little bit like this. And I'm curious if maybe you all experience this too. I would experience the stressful situation in a moment, but the moment would be temporary. Maybe that moment would be 5 minutes long. Maybe it would be 50 minutes long. Maybe it would be 5 hours long. But the point being, it had a beginning, a middle, and an end. At some point, that stressful moment would be over. But what I noticed was that even when the moment was over, it wouldn't be over in my mind. My mind had this way of kind of clinging to that stress, kind of carrying it with me. When we say there's like a weight on our shoulders, it was like that. My mind would cling to that stress long after the moment had passed. So I started to realize that I was really letting stress and the negativity that followed dictate my life. Because I'd go home from a stressful day, I'd be reactive with my partner. Maybe I would be exhausted from just mentally dwelling on that stressful moment, where I'd be replaying it over and over, thinking, did I navigate that right? Did I do the right thing? Did I say the right thing? Oh, if I could go back now, I'd probably do something different. Or my whole nervous system in a state of stress would start to predict, anticipate, worry. What's the next stressful thing coming my way? What's going to come up tomorrow that's going to throw me for a loop and create this life dictated by stress? I'd have trouble falling asleep, dwelling on the stress in my life, or even staying asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, thinking and worrying and anticipating and feeling anxious. And in this moment, this really pivotal moment of my life, this sudden loss of my mom, this clarity really it floated to the surface. And the clarity was this, that I don't have control over the quantity of my life. None of us do, to a degree. We never know how many more days, weeks, years we have left. But what we do have control over is the quality of our lives. And in that moment, I thought the quality of my life was really in the toilet. I was letting stress dictate my life in so many ways. And what I realized was that I had this tool already in my pocket, this tool of mindfulness, which we know is one of the best research-based ways to improve the quality of our life, to improve our positivity, our optimism, our ability to be hopeful in difficult times. So what I really realized in that moment of clarity 9 years ago, where things completely shifted for me, I really realized that stress in life is unavoidable. There are almost, if not more now, 8 billion of us on this planet floating through the universe. Not one of us gets through life without stress. There's no one out there living a stress-free life, not someone who's retired, not someone who has a cottage, not someone whose kids are now off to college, not someone who's financially wealthy. Nobody. Stress is unavoidable, but it doesn't have to dictate our lives. This stress, these moments of challenge that we all face in our lives, it doesn't have to spiral us into a constant state of stress and negativity. When we go through difficult times, they can actually be an opportunity to develop resources, inner strength to move forward through life's difficulties, and we can continue to remain hopeful and optimistic. And as a mindfulness teacher, I have the gift of being able to do this every day, teach people how to do this every day, to use these tools to improve their resilience and their optimism in what is definitely a stressful and chaotic world. There are so many advantages to practicing mindfulness, which, if you didn't know, it's actually a thousands of year old practice that is now completely mainstream. And it's a research-based practice as well. And one of the many benefits is its ability to shift us from a pessimistic outlook in life to an optimistic one. And a big part of this is understanding that we can actually influence the state of our brain. Your brain can be in a negative state, it can be in a stressed out state, a neutral state, or a positive state. And that's not just left up to chance. There are things you can do, actions you can take in your life to make it more likely that your brain will be in a positive state. So the first piece I want to talk about with this idea of mindfulness helping us to be more positive, more optimistic, more hopeful. The first step that I want you to take on this journey, I call it start where you are. Start where you are. We want to acknowledge the reality of what it's like to live on planet Earth as a human being. We got to start where we are. We can't just assume everything is rainbows and butterflies and sunshine and lollipops, because it's not. And there's a story in mindfulness teachings that illustrates this really well. So I want to tell that to you. This story is about a really poor farmer. And this poor farmer has one horse. That's all he has on his farm. And one day he wakes up and his one horse has run off. It's gone missing. Now, this poor farmer, he lives in a small town. If you've ever lived in a small town, you probably understand the next part of the story when I say that all of a sudden the news that the farmer's only horse starts to spread throughout the town. Everybody, all the people in the village are finding out, and they're talking, did you hear? Did you hear what happened? And sure enough, a bunch of the townspeople come over to the farmer's house, and they're expressing their regrets. We're so sorry. We heard what happened. It's horrible. And you must have such bad luck. This is just such bad news. And the farmer, while he's not happy that his only horse has gone missing, he remains quite calm and steady, and he says, well, let's see what happens. So some days go by, and finally, Amazingly, the farmer's horse shows back up. It comes back home. And not only does it come back home, but it brings in tow 5 wild horses with it. Well, again, the news starts to travel through the small town, the village, and people are saying, "Did you hear? Did you hear the news?" And again, a bunch of the people from the town come by the farmer's home and they're saying, "We're so happy for you. We heard the news. This is amazing." They're seeing these wild horses. "You have such good luck. This is such good news." And the farmer, again, certainly he's happy about what's happened, but he's pretty calm and steady. And he says, "Well, we'll see what happens." Some weeks go by. And the farmer's son, his only son, one horse, one son, he's training some of these wild horses. He's trying to break them in so that they can use them on the farm. And one of the wild horses kind of has a little bit of a fit and he lifts up his front legs and he kind of bucks the farmer's son off of his back. And the farmer's son falls and he breaks his leg. So he's laid up in bed. Again, the news travels throughout the town. Again, the people from the town come by the farmer's home expressing their regrets. "This is such bad luck. This is such bad news." And again, the farmer responds the same. We'll see what happens. Weeks go by. The farmer's son is healing his leg. He's still laid up in bed. And the local army comes through town. They're looking to conscript all the young, healthy men to fight in their latest battle. But of course, the farmer's son, laid up in bed with a broken leg, can't go fight. You can probably imagine the way that the townspeople responded. You can probably imagine the response of the farmer himself. This story could keep going, right? I could keep telling that story for the next 40 minutes. This story, it could go on, and it illustrates a truth about the world that we live in. It's not all positive. It's also not all negative. There are ups and there are downs. Every single day there are ups and downs. In fact, in the past, our world has been described as VUCA. This term came out after the Cold War. They said our world is volatile, it's uncertain, it's chaotic, it's ambiguous. We never know what to expect. It's always changing. It's so fragile. In any given day, we face ups and downs. Good luck and bad luck, moments of joy, moments of sorrow. And we might think, yeah, the world really is this way. And of course we do. We've just gone, 2+ years through a pandemic, but the world is always this way. Whether we're navigating war, famine, pandemic, whether we have a brief 10 minutes in the world where things are peaceful, it's always VUCA. We never know what to expect. We never have. And that's because our world follows this unmovable truth that is taught in mindfulness, this truth of impermanence. Everything in the world is impermanent. Everything you know comes into existence, changes over time, and at a certain point ceases to exist. Just take a look around the room that you're in. Is there anything in your room right now, even outside, even as you look out a window, is there anything that does not follow this law of impermanence? I know the books on my shelf follow this law, the furniture in my room, the plants in my room, everything, even me, follows this rule. Comes into existence, changes over time, and at some point ceases to exist. We could say that the nature of the world is to change. But the nature of humans is to struggle with that change. It's not easy to deal with change. Many changes in our life create stress and anxiety and negativity, right? Just think about anything that you enjoy in your life. Maybe you have a favorite coffee shop you go to. One day you're going to go to that coffee shop and something is going to change and it will probably cause you stress. Maybe the whole shop is torn down. Maybe they take your favorite drink off the menu. Maybe your favorite employee has moved on. Change, and we struggle. And we really saw that occur in the pandemic, where almost everything changed in a really short period of time. Many of us suffer due to change. And you might even reflect to yourself, does change in my life commonly create stress and anxiety for me? What change are you navigating right now that might be creating stress and anxiety for you? So, starting where you are is about acknowledging reality, that life is often challenging. We don't want to get into toxic positivity where we're trying to put a positive spin on everything, even things that are extremely difficult. So we want to start where we are, acknowledging that the world has ups and downs, joyful moments and moments of sorrow. One more way that we can start where we are when we're thinking about increasing our optimism and our hope is to acknowledge that not only do we live in an impermanent, ever changing world, but our brain inside of our skull actually makes it really challenging for us to be positive. I remember several years ago, I ran a workshop right here in Banff for a small group. There was about 10 people. And overall, the feedback on the workshop was amazing. 9 out of the 10 people were really engaged in the session, came up to me afterward, thanking me, giving me positive feedback. One person during the whole workshop, she kind of had her arms crossed, her brow was furrowed. She was asking, really probing questions. And then at the end of the workshop, she just left right out the door. No, thank you, no questions, no engagement. This is an illustration of the negativity bias. I went home. I drove home. I walked in my door. My husband welcomed me home and said, "How was your workshop?" What do you think is the first thing I told him? The first thing I told him, not the 9 people who said that was amazing and who were really engaged. I told him about the one person who seemed not interested. This is how our brain makes it challenging to live in an ever-changing world, because our brain has this thing called the negativity bias. It literally is constantly, even right now, your brain is scanning your world, including this virtual world you're engaged in and, what's real around you. It's scanning that for threats. And your brain actually uses 2/3 of its resources to do this. Your brain has an actual specific piece of the brain, actual specific little area called the amygdala. Look at how tiny it is in the grand scheme of the brain, but it is really powerful. The amygdala is like the alarm system for your brain. And as soon as it sees something negative, as soon as it noticed that woman crossing her arm, furrowing her brow, asking probing questions, it starts to go off like an alarm, right? You can think flashing lights, a beeping noise, right? And it's saying, "Okay, Trish, remember this. This is a threat. She doesn't like you. She doesn't like your content. What if, more people feel that way? What will happen?" Right? Kind of a silly example, but one that probably we all experience. So the key to this first step of starting where we are, we're like, I want to be more optimistic and hopeful in my world. First step, acknowledge that the world we live in is impermanent. It's not all going to be positive. We are going to go through difficult moments and we're going to go through beautiful moments in our life. It's a mix of the two. In the past, it's been called the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sorrows, or the full catastrophe of life. This is reality. So we can't force ourselves. We can't even ask ourselves to be positive and hopeful 100% of the time. That's not life. And then to add on to this challenge, we've got a brain that has got this darn negativity bias that is highlighting the negative things in our life. So that's where we can start. Now that we've acknowledged what's real about this challenge, this kind of pickle we're in as human beings, now we can start to take some steps to see if we can influence our brain to be more positive. When we think about positivity, often we think about happiness, right? If I'm more positive, I'll probably be happier. And if we look around us at the media and maybe even at our past as we grew up, what were the messages we received, especially from the media? What were the messages we received that told us how to be happier? What were the things we were told will make us happier? Maybe it's finding the right job and working our way up the career ladder, getting to the top, getting lots of power, making more money. Once we make more money, then we're going to be desirable. Maybe we'll find a partner who will love us because they think we're powerful and wealthy. And then maybe we can buy all the things that we want. We can have the latest, kitchen renovation. We can have the latest vehicle. We can have the latest clothing and jewelry, and we can get our hair done all the time. And that's definitely what will make us happy. And many of us probably know that this is a bit of a lie. a bit of a lie. We've been sold this idea that that's how we become more positive and happy. But humans are susceptible to this thing called hedonic adaptation. We adapt to our happiness. Meaning, whatever level of happiness you're at right now, if you would measure it a 7 out of 10, even if you won the lottery tomorrow, you think, oh, that would definitely bring me to a 10 out of 10. What research tells us is that's not true. Research tells us when we get that thing we want, the money, the power, the job title, the spouse, the new sweater, whatever it is, we get a temporary bump in our happiness. Maybe we go from a 7 to a 9, but then we adapt. So then weeks or months go by and we go back down to a 7. Even though we still have that new sweater, we still have that new car, we adapt to our level of happiness. So stuff, things, external things are not a source of long-term happiness. And there's a ton of research done into this to prove it to be true. In fact, 90%, that's a massive number, 90% of your happiness is due to the way your brain processes your world and circumstances, not your actual circumstances. So let's break this down a little bit. What does this mean? Okay, so an actual circumstance would be somebody living, let's say, in a 1-bedroom apartment, right? So that thing itself doesn't necessarily bring a certain amount of happiness. It's about how your brain processes your circumstances. So let's look at 2 different people and how their brains might process that circumstance quite differently. Let's take somebody who is homeless, someone who's living on the street currently, and they get told that they have a 1-bedroom apartment to move into. Think about the way that person's brain is going to process that circumstance. Now, let's think about someone who's a millionaire and who lives in a 15-room mansion, and they've got, 3 pools and 5 hot tubs and, pool table room and a theater room, and they're now told you're going to live in this 1-bedroom apartment. Their happiness levels are going to be drastically different. Why? Because your happiness isn't based on just the circumstances. It's based on how your brain is perceiving, is relating to those circumstances. So your happiness and positivity, it's not about what you have or what you don't have. It's not about having the sweater or not having it, having the nice new car or not having it. It's about how your brain perceives what you have or what you don't have. Pretty amazing, right? About what you perceive your brain has or doesn't have. So one way that we can actually influence our brain to perceive our circumstances with more positivity and optimism is by practicing mindfulness. This can actually help us to perceive our circumstances from a more positive and optimistic and hopeful perspective. Now, mindfulness these days, I am a mindfulness teacher. I teach it basically every day. Of course, I take my weekends off, but mindfulness is very popular these days. And I'm even willing to wager that it is a buzzword. Probably all of us on this call has heard this word before, right? Have heard of mindfulness. Maybe a friend told you about it. You saw a social media post. It's been on the cover of a magazine. You heard it on the radio. Fewer of us, you might even just ask yourself this question, do I really know what it means? I might have heard the word before, but do I really know what it means? Likely fewer of us are in that category of knowing, being able to confidently share a definition of it. And then even fewer of us are in a practice of mindfulness. I saw someone post the other day, you can't just read about doing push-ups. You actually have to do them. And I thought, wow, that you could replace the word push-ups with mindfulness in that post. You can't just read about mindfulness. I mean, certainly you can. No one's stopping you. But you're not going to get the benefit. Just like you won't get the benefit from push-ups if you only read about them. You'll never get the benefit of mindfulness if you only read about it. You want to practice it. So let's look at what mindfulness is and how can it contribute to our mind, our brain being in a more positive or optimistic state. First, I want to ask you a question. Right now, where is your mind? Sounds like a trick question. Right now, where is my mind? You might think, well, it's in my head. My brain is in my skull. But right now, where is your mind in terms of what are you thinking about? Is your mind really right here with me listening? Is your mind thinking about an argument you had this morning with a partner, a roommate, a kid? Is your mind thinking about a meeting you had this morning and wishing that you had said something differently than what you did? Is your mind already at the weekend, thinking about your weekend plans? Is your mind thinking about, a one-on-one or a performance review you have like tomorrow with your boss and thinking, what are they going to say? Are they going to fire me? Where is your mind? I love sharing this image when I teach mindfulness because it gives, I think, the two sides of the coin. The side of the coin of what it means to be mindful and the side of the coin of what it means to be maybe mindless, we could call it. So what's the situation we're looking at here? Well, we've got a human and a dog, and they're walking maybe in beautiful Banff National Park on a trail, trying to avoid some bears, which I've already seen 3 of them this year here in town. They're hungry. They're coming down from the snowy areas. Anyhow, they're having a beautiful walk, right? That's what is really happening in that moment. But look at the different ways that these beings are perceiving the moment in their mind. Look at the different ways they're experiencing the moment. So we've got the dog. We've got the dog that what's happening in the dog's mind is actually, that's interesting, exactly what's happening in the moment the dog is in. Its mind is present with the moment that it's in. Notice it's not trying to improve upon the moment. It's not thinking, well, this is good, but you know what would be really good? If there was a stick right here that I could be chewing on. Or, you know what would be even better? If my best dog friend from the dog park was here and we could just play and roll around. It's also not thinking about the past or about the future. It's not thinking about, that day at the dog park last week where that one dog got kind of nasty and growled at it. It's not thinking and worrying about that. It's not thinking about even its dinner that night. It's not even thinking, oh, I wonder what's for dinner tonight. Spoiler alert, same thing. Same thing you've had for basically every meal if you're my dog. So there's the dog experience. That is an experience of mindfulness. Mind present in the moment. Well, now let's look at the human. And as we look at the human, we might be feeling very seen. We might be feeling like, I'm feeling personally attacked by this, right? This is what my mind does. And we would look deeper into that little thought bubble and we see where that person's mind is, and it's everywhere but here. It's everywhere but here. And when you look even deeper into that, you'll notice a lot of the things that person is thinking about look pretty stressful, right? Pretty anxiety provoking. That's like my story of talking about stress dictating my life. My mind would just cling to all these stressful experiences. It would create stressful experiences that hadn't even happened yet in my life. We could call this a state of mindlessness. We could call it a state of mind wandering. And what we know is that 47% of the time, this is from a Harvard study, 47% of the time, your human brain is doing that, mind wandering. And 2/3 of that time, the human brain is wandering to things that are negative. So look at this, even if you're having a positive moment in your life, taking your dog for a walk, if you're thinking about something negative, you're going to feel negative, right? And that stress and negativity is going to start to dictate your life. And we might be thinking, well, how do I become like the dog? How do I do it? How do I be more mentally present so I'm spending less time in a negative mind state? Well, the state of mindfulness isn't something to hope for or wish for. It's not a catchphrase or an inspiring quote. It's a practice, right? You can't just read about push-ups. You got to do the practice. We can't just read or talk about mindfulness, this mental state of being in the present moment with acceptance. We have to practice. So that's what we're going to do right now. If you'll join me, all you need to do is sit. I'm guessing many of you are sitting right now, so you can stay sitting, but you might want to sit up a little bit taller. So lengthen your spine a little bit, maybe roll the shoulders. I often hear a little bit of popcorn in there when I do so. That's late 30s. Sitting tall, I like to uncross my legs and find the ground with the soles of my feet. And optionally, here you can close your eyes. Closing the eyes is helpful to focus the mind, which is part of what we're doing. But if you're in a place where you don't feel safe to close the eyes, you could always just slightly gaze down to something that's not going to provoke more thoughts than we probably already have. Okay, so closing the eyes. And let's just start with a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Good. Now, I want you to see if you can focus your attention on your breathing. What does that mean? How do I focus? Well, I'm taking my mind and I'm focusing it on my breath. I'm observing my breath, feeling the breath come in, feeling the breath come out. And let's see if we can anchor our focus on the breath. The breath is in the present moment. So if our mind is focusing on the breath, our mind will be in the present moment. Now, maybe you've focused on one breath or two, but inevitably your human mind is going to do what the cartoon person's mind was doing. It's going to wander. Maybe thinking about the past or the future. As soon as you notice your mind wanders to the past or the future, I want you to just gently guide your attention back to your breath. So 3 simple steps, and then I'll give you a little bit of silence to practice. Focus on your breath. Notice the moment that your mind wanders, and then refocus on your breath. Notice where your mind is. Refocus back to the breath just for a few more moments. And as we come to the end of this brief little mindfulness practice, notice how you're feeling. When you're ready here, you can begin to blink the eyes open. So that was a simple mindfulness practice. Over time, if you do that practice consistently, just like if you did push-ups consistently and your muscles would get stronger, if you do that practice consistently, your mind gets better at being in the present moment, spends less time wandering off to negative, stressful, anxiety-provoking thoughts that start to kind of create a storm of negativity inside of us. You know, with the increase in some scientific data, lots of scientific data actually over the last 30 or 40 years that supports the practice of mindfulness to help us be more resilient and optimistic, we're seeing lots of people who maybe we think would be unlikely practitioners of mindfulness in the world. We're seeing lawyers practicing mindfulness, doctors. We're even seeing the US military engage in mindfulness practices. And there's a story of one young man who was in the US military who he had a little bit of an anger management problem. And so his superior officer actually required him to take a mindfulness training course. And he was in the middle of this course, and one day he came home. He was leaving for the day, and he came home to make dinner, and he realized he needed to stop by the grocery store for some items. He got his items. The grocery store was really, really busy, but he gathered his items and he got in line. Well, as he stood in line, he noticed in this long line that the woman in front of him was in the wrong line. She was carrying a baby. She had a baby on her hip, and she had one item, one grocery item. Yet she wasn't in the express lane. And maybe it was because he had been trained in the military, but he had just a tendency to want to see things done correctly. So he thought, well, that's kind of annoying, right? It's kind of irritating. Why wouldn't she follow the rules? And she can see that it's busy. Why wouldn't she get in the proper line? So he could feel just a bit of irritation as he stood there in line. The line moved up and he, was noticing just how busy it was and it was feeling overwhelming to him and he was just feeling this irritation grow. Well, finally, as they moved up in the line, the woman in front of him with the baby and the one item gets up to the cashier and she starts to chat with the cashier. And as he observes, he thinks, well, this is like more than just a conversation, a friendly, hello you'd have with a cashier. This is like a full on conversation they're having. And he was thinking, gosh, do they not realize it's busy? They need to be more, aware of their surroundings and kind of let's get this thing going. And he started to feel even more angry. This anger is rising, and he could even feel that he wanted to say something. He wanted to just jump in and, react and maybe give them a piece of his mind. But because of his mindfulness training, he remembered what his teacher said, that they encouraged him to be present with any feelings that were surfacing, and that a feeling is actually like a wave. It'll grow and grow, and it will have a peak, the most intense point of the feeling, which is likely the moment that we react, sometimes in ways we later regret. And his teacher said, if you can ride that wave and see that peak happen, slowly that wave will go back down into the rest of the water and the emotion will pass if you can be present with it. So he stood there in line and breathed, and he noticed the anger. He noticed that his body was getting hot. His jaw was clenching. He was noticing tension in his neck and shoulders, his heart beating fast. He noticed that urge to say something. And then he noticed that the anger peaked. And then it slowly started to decrease. And he looked up and he saw that the woman, the cashier, was actually now holding the baby. The woman had passed her baby over the cashier. He's thinking, this is wild. I don't know. But at this point, he's not feeling as angry. They continue. They move on. The woman and the baby and her one grocery item leave the store. And now it's his turn. He gets up to the cashier. And he's now feeling much better as he was able to be present with his anger. It peaked and then it relaxed. And he said to the cashier as he's making small talk, he said, that was kind of a cute baby back there. And the cashier looked up at him. She looked at his uniform and then she looked him right in the eye and she said, oh, do you think so? She said, that's actually my son. And then she said, my husband was actually in the military just like you. But he was killed in Afghanistan. And so now my mom looks after my son and I have to work. So she makes sure to bring him in, before she puts him to bed at night. We are often so quick to judge somebody else, to tell some negative story in our mind about what's happening. And the invitation of mindfulness is to step out of that reaction, that intensity, that stress, that negativity in any moment, and to be able to calm ourselves. And mindfulness helps us understand that this ability for us to find an inner space of calm amidst the stress and negativity is possible. It helps us to not get stuck in a negative or pessimistic story that often we've just made up in our minds. Practicing mindfulness also increases something in our brain that's called an alpha wave. So our brain is like this electrical storm. It's got all these electrical waves in it. And one of the types of waves is alpha waves. When you have more alpha waves in your brain, you are likely in a state of wakeful relaxation. You feel calmer, you're less anxious, less stressed. When you have more alpha waves, research has showed that these people have less sadness, less anger, potentially even less depression. So amazing benefits of practicing mindfulness. Okay, so we've got these two steps. We've got start where we are. Acknowledge that the world is full of ups and downs, and our brain kind of likes to stick like Velcro to the downs, to the stressful moments. That's the reality of what we're dealing with. Then we can begin to practice mindfulness that can help us to find this inner calm, to notice when we're caught up in patterns of thought of negativity, to increase our alpha waves, promoting these states of wakeful relaxation. Practicing mindfulness can also help us to be more present in our lives in the good moments so that we can savor the good moments. How good would that be, right? We said, the world is impermanent, ups and downs. So there are good moments. But if we're not present for them, do we even notice that they're good? We can savor the good just by being more mentally present. So savoring, you might, connect with food. You might connect with a nice bowl of ice cream or a piece of chocolate or a nice glass of wine. Savoring is about enjoying something on purpose. It's lengthening and deepening the good that you feel when something pleasant is happening, when you're in one of those up moments of life. We appreciate it fully and deeply, and it's kind of like you amplify. It's kind of like turning up the volume on a really good song to listen to it. We can actually turn up the volume on positive and pleasant emotions that we feel. But it's really hard to do this when we're in a good moment, but mentally dwelling on our problems, when we're lost in thought in our head, when we're focusing on the negative. So when we're present, we can notice the good. There's actually been experiments done that have showed that humans miss out on good moments really often. Really often. So there was this experiment done. It was done the morning after a violin concert that a world-class violinist named Joshua Bell gave in New York City. And that night before at his concert, it was completely sold out. It was, the room was full of women in ball gowns and men in tuxes, and people paid lots of money to be there. And the next morning, that same violinist, Joshua Bell, took his violin to the New York subways. He dressed in plain clothes. He put a hat out to receive donations like a busker would. And he started to play the same pieces he played the night before. He wasn't just playing, hot cross buns. He was playing beautiful pieces. How many people do you think noticed in their rush to work, in their mental dwelling on the negative things in their life, the stresses, the meetings, the problems, the real problems, and the made up ones? There were a couple researchers that stood by as he did this experiment, and they noticed that barely anybody stopped, a couple of kids. And at the end of playing for an hour, he had $17 that was donated in his hat that he had put out. There are beautiful things, positive things, hopeful things. They're happening all the time, I promise you. And if you're only hyper-focused on what's wrong, on the problems and the stresses, you won't see them. You just won't. Doesn't mean they're not there, but they won't have any meaning in your life. We're going to do one more mindfulness practice here together. I call this hardwiring happiness. This is going to help the good moments of your life stick to your brain. Stick like a piece of Velcro. What we know about the brain is what flows through the brain. And what is it that flows through the brain? Thoughts flow through the brain, shape the brain. The more you think a thought, the chances of you thinking that thought increase. The more you think negative thoughts, the more you're going to think negative thoughts. It's like planting seeds. The more you think optimistic and hopeful thoughts, the more of those you'll think too. It's kind of like cultivating a garden. What seeds are you planting? Are you planting negative seeds or positive seeds? Are you planting thorns or are you planting flowers? Let's go ahead and find that comfortable, tall, seated position. Optionally closing the eyes, connecting the feet to the ground. Let's take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. So we're going to plant a flower in the mind here. I want you to think about something good that you experienced in the last 24 hours. anything. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be world changing. It can be anything. Your sip of coffee this morning, being outside, feeling the sun on your skin, a snuggle with a pet, somebody saying thank you to you. Think of something good that happened in the last 24 hours. And really notice it. Like notice, oh, that was a good moment. And now I want you to ask yourself, why was that a good moment? What were the details? What was happening? Maybe your coffee was in your favorite mug. Maybe the way the person said thank you to you was really sincere. Explore the details of that good moment in your mind for the next few breaths. And allow yourself to feel that good. Savor it. Notice the feelings you were experiencing, what emotions were present. And really soak them up for the next 3 breaths. It's kind of like you're marinating in that good moment. You're soaking it up like a sponge. And as you do that, your brain is making meaning. Your brain is sticking to that good moment in the same way it likes to stick to the negative. Remember, our happiness is less about the actual things that happen in our life and more about how we perceive them. When you're ready, you can begin to open your eyes. So 3 really simple steps. Notice the positive moments. See them. Acknowledge them. Explore the details. Let your mind turn them over. You know how you might lay in bed and your mind turns over every single problem you have, the real ones, the made up ones, and you just dwell on them? Do that with your blessings, with the good things in your life. Absorb that feeling with your body. Soak it up like you're a sponge or like you're a piece of meat or tofu that you're marinating, right? I love to do this before I go to bed at night. Helps me to drift off to sleep, to feel relaxed, and do so from a positive frame of mind. They say that mindfulness is the root of happiness because happiness is only possible for you in this moment. That's it. You might think, oh, my happiness is in the future when I get that job promotion, when I have X amount of money in my bank account, when I get that new car, when we renovate the kitchen, when my kids go off to school, when I meet the partner of my dreams. No, happiness is only possible here. And if you can't be present for the moments of your life, how can you be happy, right? You know that old saying, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a noise? So I'm redoing that saying about happiness and optimism. If something good happens in your life and you don't pay attention to it, did it happen? According to the research, according to the way our brain perceives our life, it didn't. It doesn't matter unless you pay attention to it, unless you notice it and say, man, that was a really good moment. Man, I'm really blessed. Man, I have a really great life. And I've got some stressful things happening. We're not ignoring that. We're just also remembering that actually, if you're on this call, if you're alive, there's more right with you than there is wrong with you, right? If you are here listening to me speak these words right now, you are in the top 10% of fortunate people in our world. You probably have eaten something today. You probably are safe. You're healthy enough to be here. And it's not saying that to negate the challenges you have in your life. That's toxic positivity. And in our last few minutes, that's what we're talking about. It's to say, yes, I have all these hard things in my life and I ate something today. I have a roof over my head. I'm happy. I'm healthy. I have people who love me and I love them. Being present for those moments will create happiness. And let's get to this piece because it's so important. The last piece is avoiding toxic positivity. What's the difference? What's the difference between thinking positively or toxic positivity and thinking positively, right? Enhancing our optimism. Well, when we want to enhance our optimism, we're focusing on the benefits of having your brain in a positive state when you're going through something difficult. Toxic positivity, by contrast, is saying you have to be positive regardless of the difficulties you're going through. See the difference? And some examples of toxic positivity you can catch in yourself or in others is when people say, maybe you share a problem with them and they go, well, at least it could be worse. At least, you lost your job. Oh, well, at least your partner still has their job. Or one kid is failing. Well, at least your other kid's really smart, right? Or thinking that sadness equals weakness. That's toxic positivity. This is a really sticky, tricky one that I used to fall into. Everything happens for a reason. People who are going through devastating times in their lives, that's not helpful. It's just not. So overall, with this, we have to remember that we want to focus on the benefits of being optimistic, but it's not about skipping over the difficult moments in life. Remember, way back at the beginning, we talked about start where you are. That's just acknowledging, man, sometimes life sucks. Sometimes it really does. Sometimes we are going to experience really difficult moments in our lives. But we also don't have to be a victim of life. We can actually make choices and take actions to affect how we feel for the better. When I think about enhancing optimism, this quote comes to mind. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Have you ever gone through an experience with somebody else and you have drastically different interpretations of that same situation? Right? That's the mindset. That's your different perspective. We see things based on our experiences, our biology, our history, our perspective. Somebody maybe comes across a dog in a park and they got bit by a dog as a kid, and so they have bad memories and they have an aversion to a dog. And another person thinks, oh, what a cute dog, I'm going to go play with it. So this is really about what perspective you're taking in your life. How are you focusing on your attitudes and your efforts to shift your perspective maybe towards a more optimistic one? Also, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we all have bad days. We all have bad weeks. It's not about avoiding those, but it's about not getting stuck there. And that's what mindfulness can help us with. It can help us to be present in each moment as it comes, so we don't get stuck in that stress and negativity, even during a moment that is actually free of both of those things. So I think a few questions to ask yourself as we wrap up is my life defined by stress and negativity? Do I want to make a different choice? And I'll share one final story here. I remember a really pivotal moment where I recognized that stress and negativity were taking over for me. It was a couple weeks after my mom's passing, and I had gone back to work after kind of wrapping things up and having the funeral. And one of my first days back to work, we had a team meeting. And I recognized as I listened to everybody sharing their updates that everything was negative. Everything was negative. I couldn't get over it. And at the end of the meeting, it even finished. We tried to finish on a positive note. We were recognizing that it was one of our coworkers' birthdays the next week. And we said to her, let's go out for lunch. What do you want to do? And she was turning 50. And she was like, I don't want to do anything. I'm feeling really depressed that I'm 50 and I don't want to celebrate. And I started to feel angry because all I could think of was that my mom didn't even have the privilege of another birthday. And how dare this woman not be so grateful that she's still around. My mom was 55, so young. And so I remember actually I could feel myself like angry, and then tears were coming, and I excused myself from the meeting. And I remember walking into my office, closing my door, sitting down, and I had two thoughts. I thought, I was so sad for her that she couldn't even be grateful for her life in that moment. She was so stuck in stress and negativity. And then the second thought I had was, if I don't make some changes in my life, I'm going to be just like her. That's my future. Because every day, every moment, you have a choice. How you spend your days ends up being how you spend your life. It's about moment to moment, these decisions, these choices that keep us stuck in stress and negativity or not. And the world, as we mentioned, it's always going to be changing. It's always going to be impermanent, uncertain, chaotic. And the practice of mindfulness, it's not going to change that. It's not going to change the chaos and the stress of the world, but it will change you. Your ability to be present in the moment, to face your challenges with calm, to savor the good moments while they're here and have hope for the future. Ultimately, we cannot stop the waves of life. We can't control the world, but we can learn to take some small daily actions to support a more optimistic outlook on life. We can ride those waves of life with a little bit more ease. I would love to invite you to stay connected with me. You can find me on social media. I run several public courses for folks to continue along on their mindfulness journey, and I'd love to see you in some of them. Thank you so much for inviting me out today. We're going to open it up to questions here. Thanks to you all for your attention and your engagement.
Thank you so much, Trish, for that incredible presentation. We know that caregiving and counsel work can both be incredibly stressful. So as we invite our attendees to regroup, recharge, I know that they'll be able to take some of the learnings and suggestions that you've shared with us to do just that. So we have a few questions. So you mentioned someone who, if someone is stuck, so stuck in that negativity, stuck in that, how do you help someone who's in that place? Are there things you can say to them that can help maybe get them unstuck?
Yeah. You know, years ago, I would have said, like, ask them about what's good in their life. But honestly, I think that is a bit of toxic positivity. So the first thing I would actually say is connect with them on the level of their suffering. Like maybe just an acknowledgement of, that sounds really difficult. I can hear that you're really struggling. If you're in a position to offer some support, you can ask, like, is there any way that I could support or I could help, or do you want to talk about it for 10 minutes, or just offering a kind ear. But I think, yeah, I know for me, when I think about times where I'm really struggling, I just want someone to hear that and say, like, wow, that sounds really hard. Like sometimes actually that's way more helpful than someone saying, like, okay, but what are you grateful for today? Because then I don't feel
Yeah.
heard. Then I feel like, did you even hear what I just said? Like, so I think the first step of like, or yeah, I've felt that way too before. It's really tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, and that family councils are at their core about peer support. So doing just that sort of been there, done that, got the T-shirt, can talk to you all about it piece. So that's, yeah, I think that's really, really in line with what our attendees do on a regular basis. On the flip side, how would you respond to someone who is expressing toxic positivity, who maybe you are saying this is really her, and they're like, yeah, but what else is good in your life? What's a way to respond to that?
Yeah, I think I might say, I appreciate that you're trying to help me feel better, but I'm not really ready to go there yet. I'm not
Mhm.
really, my brain, my heart isn't ready to go to the positive place yet. I think I need to spend some time being present with what I'm really feeling right now,
Mhm.
which is sadness or anger or frustration or grief or fear, right? I'm
Mhm.
not quite ready to go there yet, but I appreciate, your support.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think often we don't really have the language to name our emotions.
Yeah.
And so, are there any tools or resources you recommend for being able to really explore so that we can name
Yeah.
what it is that we're feeling?
There is a really cool, I don't know if this tool has a name, and I know there's lots of different variations of it, but I use it quite a bit with, I work one-on-one with folks who want to develop their mindfulness practice. It's like a wheel. I don't know if you've seen this
Mm-hmm.
before, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it has kind of like, it's like concentric circles going out, and it'll have like in the smallest section, it's got kind of like the most basic emotions that probably all of us living in North America could identify, like
Mm.
sadness, anger, frustration, happy, like just the super basic ones. And then it goes out into concentric circles. So then it takes sadness, and then it gives you like 5 different feelings that are like sad. They're like tones of sadness. It
Mhm.
breaks it out, and then it keeps breaking it out. So you start to get even more kind of clear on what's the exact tone
Mhm.
of sadness that I'm feeling, or what's the exact tone of anger, because there's lots of different ones. There's just as a side note, I was watching, Brene Brown has a new
Mm.
series, and she said she did an informal research piece on her social media
Mm.
platforms. And she said, what emotions do you feel? And she said, overall, on average, most people who responded said they had 3. And it
Hmm.
was happy, sad, and the last one was angry, but they used a different term that was a little
Mhm.
harsher, but
Mhm.
happy, sad, and angry. And it's like, yeah, that's probably many of us, that
Mhm.
is the extent of our emotional awareness. So that wheel is really cool for getting a little bit more
Mm.
pinpointed on, okay, it's not just sad, it's actually I'm in anguish, right? And
Mm.
then looking at
Mm.
that tone. So that's an interesting tool I found.
Great.
Mhm.
So, caregiving, family council work, it's hard. We have people who are advocating for their loved one within an under resourced and often under respected sector.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
what would you say to someone who's doing, hard work? They're up against so many barriers, challenges, who says, how can you be optimistic within all of that, all that's wrong with long
Yeah.
term care?
Yeah. I would say, like, look for a glimmer. Look for a glimmer of a moment in your day that has a tone of like goodness.
Mm.
And it might just be that. It might be just a glimmer at first,
Mhm.
of somebody smiling at you, or somebody saying thank you, or, somebody telling you about the impact you've had on
Mm.
their life, or just a moment where you get to go outside and feel the sun on your face and take one deep breath before you have
Mhm.
to go back. Um, yeah, I think it's just looking for those little glimmers of moments. And the more present we are for those little glimmers, the more of an effect they're going to actually have on
Mhm.
our mind and our heart. But often we might take a break and we go outside and we think, I need a deep breath. And then we go outside for a couple minutes and we just spend that time thinking, oh, remember that moment this morning? That was the
Mhm.
worst moment when she said that to me. Why does she always say that to me? How am I going to address that in the future? Right? And then
Mhm.
we're missing the opportunity for a little glimmer that actually can restore us, right? Like they talk about filling up your cup, or, you know, refueling ourselves, but instead we're depleting ourselves more in that moment. And it's really actually about what's happening up here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
look,
being
look for a
intentional.
glimmer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
intentional, looking for building in, something that brings you joy, that helps you with that practice,
Yeah.
making space and time for it.
Right.
Yeah, whether it's that cup of coffee or that, moment, midday.
Yeah.
Couple questions that are more on the sort of help the group side of things.
Mhm.
So, what would you recommend for groups of people who, let's say at a meeting, want to incorporate mindfulness into their practices? Is there something you'd recommend for, let's say, kicking off a meeting with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is actually work that I do all the time. I have clients where I come in weekly and I guide them in pieces during their meetings. But you can also use apps. You can use, lots of different kind of technological pieces to do that. But it could even just be like literally a minute as the meeting starts. I mean, think about any meetings that you've been a part of. We're all coming to that space, whether it's a virtual space or an in person space, with so many preoccupations,
Hmm.
so many assumptions, so many judgments, so much going on in our minds, whether it's work related or personal related, or so many agendas maybe of what we want to get in that meeting or what we want to push in that meeting or sell or whatever it is. So even giving folks like a minute to say, okay, we're all, and even just to say just that, like if I was leading a meeting, I might say, I know my mind is really busy today and preoccupied, and in order for us to really get the most out of this meeting, I don't just want you all to be physically present, I want you to be mentally present. So we're going to take a minute just to bring our minds here into this space. You could do a minute of, breath focus, like
Mhm.
what we did. And again, there's apps and there's a really great app that I actually have some recordings on, and it's totally free. It's called Insight Timer.
Mhm.
So there's lots of stuff on there. You could play one or you could just do a minute. And another thing I love to do at the beginning of a meeting is before starting, I would just, when everybody's kind of in that mindful state, I would ask people to come up with maybe a word that kind of epitomizes the way they want to show up.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
So it's like, how do you want to show up to this meeting? It's being intentional instead of just, I'm just still thinking about the conversation I was having yesterday and I'm here, but I'm not really here. What's the word? What's the quality you want to bring to this meeting? And maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's listening, maybe it's compassion, and it might depend on what the meeting is about. But yeah, even a short little minute of focused, mind in the present, and then a question about the word, the quality they want to bring. And then you could even go around and say, okay, everybody share your word.
Mhm.
Yeah. So really keep it simple too, I would say. Simple and short. Meetings, I mean, how many meetings go over time
Mhm. Fair.
as it is?
So we two last questions.
Okay.
So one is about equity and being culturally affirming. So
Yeah.
something that FCO cares deeply about is, really elevating and speaking to the diverse experiences of residents, caregivers, and staff.
Yeah.
So, and we know there are differences in how different cultures approach conflict or
Yeah.
approach these sorts of conversations based on social norms and traditions. Do you have any thoughts about how to bring people together from different cultures, that have different needs while acknowledging and affirming that, but also maybe reinforcing, we are here together in this space and we want to be intentional?
Okay. I'm just wrapping my head around the question. So it's not really related to mindfulness. I guess it's being intentional about the way
Yeah.
you work together. I mean, full transparency, this is an area of learning for me and certainly not my expertise. The biggest thing that comes to mind to me is listening. And
Mhm.
if I tie it back to mindfulness in some way, I think when we listen, many times we're not truly listening, right? We're busy in our own heads thinking and judging what the other person
Mhm.
is saying, thinking, does that match up with what I know, with what I
Mhm.
believe? Maybe thinking of all, even the person's not even done saying what they're saying, and we might be thinking, no, I disagree. How am I going to get out So truly listening. And I think when it comes to, understanding people who are different than us, it's about listening and being willing to be. This is actually a quote about listening that I love, being willing to be changed by what you hear.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that that piece, when it comes to, diversity and inclusion and all these pieces, like how many of us are really listening and being willing to be changed? A lot of us don't want to be changed. We want to keep the way we think about it, especially if we're in a position of privilege.
Mhm.
It feels good to be there, like we don't. So yeah, listening and being willing to be changed, being willing to change our own opinions and our own beliefs and our own ways of doing things. And I think, again, kind of tying mindfulness back in, mindfulness at its heart is a non-judgmental practice. So we're actually practicing observing our judging mind and how it can get in our way, and then being willing to kind of let go of some of those judgments. And then, again, today we really scratched the surface of a lot of
Mhm.
this, but another um, really important piece of mindfulness is compassion. And so showing up really being willing to listen with compassion as well. But yeah, again, transparency, that's not my area of expertise, and it's an area I'm learning in as well.
And we all have areas of difference and similarity to explore. But I think your point around really listening to understand, not just to respond to someone, but really to see who they are and what they're experiencing goes a long way in creating belonging and inclusion. So last question, which really I think speaks to everything that you've talked about. And it's a bit about being stuck and a bit about being in a group. So let's say we have a group of people where someone is stuck in a long-standing cycle of negativity, that they bring up the same issue every time, or the way that they're showing up to meetings is always frustrated or angry or sad, whatever it is. And let's say you're leading this meeting, you're council leaders. How would you respond in the moment to that, and maybe to help them be so maintaining the group while supporting that individual or individuals, but also helping them to see the impact that they're having on others, to be aware of that, compassionate towards others?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, when I speak to folks, I usually try to encourage people to do things for themselves instead of like making recommendations for others or saying like, you should really try this. It's like, let's start here with ourselves. But again, and this kind of connects to an earlier question that you asked around beginning a meeting. So kind of like a sneaky way you could get them to practice some things that might help them to feel a little bit more positive. Another way I like to recommend folks start a meeting is, again, you could do like a little kind of minute of mindfulness, and then you can ask folks to go around and tell a piece of gratitude, share something today that they're grateful for. And that actually will shift their brain, even if it's just a tiny bit. It'll get them, and you might even notice that they might have a hard time doing this if their brain is really stuck in that negative cycle and pattern. It might take them a while to think, or they might at first say, I don't know, I don't have anything. But just kind of starting that as a practice is one way that we can help the brain start to shift into a more positive state. So as a leader, giving that cue to everybody at that meeting, okay, we have to go around, just share something really, really quick. As a leader as well, it's probably going to help you to get to know your people. Right? Chances are, I mean, you could even say, share something you're grateful for that's not work related. You're going to learn something about the humanity of your people that might actually help, right? So it's kind of doing double duty. It's helping their brain to shift into that positive state. It's helping you to get to know your people a little bit better. And then as a leader, I might see, it might take some time to kind of see that pattern surface, but I might have a conversation with them one-on-one. And again, starting with the compassion piece, starting with, here's what I notice. And, I'm sensing that this is really difficult for you. This is hard for you. Instead of, I notice that you're always negative and it's really bringing the team down. Let's shift that.
Yeah.
Like can we put ourselves in their shoes with compassion? If they're always negative and you're feeling it when you're around them and everything they're saying, imagine what it's like to be in their head and their heart. Imagine what that's like. So can I support in any way? Can I, it sounds like it would be really challenging for you. And I'm noticing the effect on the team. I would love to support you in some way. How can we, and having that transparent conversation, but coming at it from a place first of having compassion instead of just, you're bringing the team down, let's fix this.
Yeah, focusing on the individuals.
The human, yeah.
Well, thank you, Trish, so much for answering those important questions. As we come to a close for today, I want to share on behalf of the FCO team, all of our attendees, our appreciation to you for sharing your passion, your wisdom, and your insights. And I know we all have much now to reflect on and consider for how we respond to stressful events and enhance our optimism and hope. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
To those of you who've tuned in today, I hope to see you at our next session on June 8th. intentionally inviting and inclusive long-term care homes for LGBTQ plus residents and their chosen families. If you don't already know, June is Pride Month. It was born out of the fight for equal rights for LGBTQ plus people, and it's a global month of action and celebration. It celebrates the history, diversity, and contributions of Canadians who identify as members of the LGBTQIA2S plus community. But it's also a reminder that we need to and can do more to ensure that the rights and needs of these people are respected and honored, and to create a more just and inclusive world. So I hope that you will join us then and at all of our other sessions. You can learn more on our website. Until then, thank you for joining us today. Be well, stay safe, practice optimism, find those glimmers, and we will see you hopefully next week. I'm Sam Peck, Executive Director of Family Councils of Ontario. Until next time.